Que preservamos e os futuros que idealizamos. Cultura transcende barreiras, conecta corações, transforma realidades. Acreditar na energia que vem da cultura é acreditar que as histórias transformam os palcos, os ritmos e os cantos desse país. São nessas histórias que encontramos a alma e a diversidade de um povo. Celebramos essa diversidade, celebramos cada cor, cada voz, cada sorriso e cada emoção. A cultura é reflexo dos nossos sonhos. Investimos nesses sonhos há mais de 60 anos, porque acreditamos que a energia que vem da gente é a energia que impulsiona vidas. Shell, energia que vem da cultura. Onde tem cultura, a Vale está. No poder criativo que nasce dos palcos, orquestras, das artes, das ruas e dos museus. Na valorização das diversas identidades brasileiras e na preservação de memórias. Onde toca um instrumento, um futuro desperta. Nas trocas de saberes, sonhos e oportunidades se concretizam. Dos projetos que todo mundo conhece, aos que todo mundo precisa conhecer. É valorizando a cultura que crescemos e evoluímos juntos. Instituto Cultural Vale.
Dizer que o Brasil é gigante não é nenhum exagero, mas um país desse tamanho não se move sozinho. Ele conta com mais de 200 milhões de gigantes, como eu e você. Gigantes que saem cedo de casa todos os dias, com força, dedicação, coragem, pelos trilhos e estradas ou aeroportos. Gigantes que não diminuem diante dos desafios, não têm medo de distâncias, nem do longo caminho para os sonhos acontecerem. Por isso, só uma gigante como a CCR poderia estar ao lado dos brasileiros no desafio de mover este país. A CCR, 25 anos, mover o Brasil para gigantes.
Olá, novamente. Boa tarde mais uma vez. Vou pedir para as meninas se alojarem.
Hello, good afternoon again. I'm going to ask you girls to take your seats. We're going to start the second panel. I know you want to make pictures, so keep in your memory this special moment, but we're going to have time. So keep calm. Let's move on. We had this panel before about writers and written experiences. It was amazing, and we have the opportunity to be here and live this moment, and as people who are outside Rio or outside Brazil can also enjoy our panels through the broadcasting, through Canal Futura, Channel Futura, and through Floop's YouTube channel. So let's move on to the next panel. We're discovering a dictionary from A to Z of Black women, and this is going to inspire many others at the Black Woman Dictionary. This is a formative process with the Federal University and Profet. Whoever is working will be benefiting from that, and also students and politic militants are using this dictionary from Floop, being published by Malay Publishing House with Futura. Let's get to know people and Black women from our community. What are the challenges faced by these women in politics and in activism? And we can see the representation of these women in our panel. Does this panel reflect, and do these women reflect what's the Brazilian population? We have Deuclimar Pereira, Sandra Schwarstein, Valdenice Raimundo, Luciana Dias, Maria das Dores, Lúcia Pereira, Sônia Cleide Silva, Vânia Maria Soares e Gabriele Costas, a researcher. Mediation by Rosinalda Simoni. Please, Rosinalda. Good afternoon to everyone here. Each panel that I participate at as mediator, emotional levels go up, and I will promise not to cry. I never promise, because I think we have to allow ourselves to feel emotional. During so many centuries, we were forbidden to exist, to have humanity, which is one of the biggest feelings that we have, and we were forbidden to feel, to feel tired, to make mistakes. So we were not allowed to consent, and now I feel like exist. If I want to cry, I will cry. If I want to, make it scandalous because I feel angry, I will do it. But please allow yourselves to feel what you feel and consent. This is our fourth table with the team. Quilombolas and workers and politics. I'm going to invite 5 researchers, and in the second round, under 6. And since we have this huge panel with a lot of writers and entries that must be remembered, I'm going to ask you to be short in your speeches so that we can all give voices to everyone, and to allow for some room for questions. So I'm going to invite for this first round Professor Cleoma Lobato, Sandra Mônica da Silva, and Valdenice Raimundo. Wonderful. Professor Luciana de Oliveira Dias. Myself, I am already here, so I'm not gonna call my name. Monica Francisco. Welcome, Monica. I can only say to you that we have 2 rounds here, so hold on to your heart and to your crying for us to optimize our time, because I know that writers and the women we're writing about have so much to add up to our experience. So I'm going to invite the first researcher, Professor Cleoma Lobato Pereira, who is going to talk about Josefa Pereira Lau. Professor, it's up to you now. Good afternoon, everyone. As Professor said in the beginning, we have to allow ourselves to feel what we feel, and I am nervous, and I allow myself to feel nervous in front of you right now. And to talk about Josefa Pereira Lau, is a person I created an entry about, an amazing woman. I'm gonna let you know how I came across her. And I met her because I was invited to a lecture given by a very important sociologist in Macapá, my city, about the zero landmark, the Marco Zero. Macapá is scheduled this program about Marco Zero's monument. This monument is placed exactly where the equator the vision is, the equator border is, the equator line. And I was invited for a lecture. I was already researching on religious celebrations, and after this lecture, when he was talking about an important celebration about Matagão Velho, an important community there, and they invited an old lady to make her presentation. She came in, and it was pretty much like this one, full of people, everyone listening, and we had just listened. We had just had a lecture, so everyone was like shut down, quiet, waiting. And Lady Josefa came in singing with such a high level of energy, happiness. She was moving around. She was 82 years old and moving around, so happy, with such an energy, laughing. And that, moved me, touched me so much to see her enthusiasm and singing. And each Ladrão de Marabás, Ladrão is Marabás music, so each Marabás music, each bandaia she was singing, she was telling the story behind it. And that made me feel like, fascinated. And after it, I asked her to give me an interview. So she invited me to her house, and we started to build a friendship and a relationship, and I ended up following her to many other celebrations and parties in the countryside. And she was part of a traditional religious celebration in my region. And within this celebration of Our Lady of that place, it was important because she was carrying the image of Our Lady, and women could not participate at this celebration. But Dona Josefa, to her, was granted the right to be there, and she was the one keeping that celebration moving on. So she had this participation in the traditional communities because she was part of that universe, of that world, and she was opening it to whoever wanted because she was so generous. She had such a capacity to share her knowledge with everyone who wanted to be there and hear her. She was able to share her life, her story. She took people to her house. That made me feel fascinated. And in 2010, we took her to this prize given by this award given by the municipal government to the municipality, and she was awarded this prize because she was recognized as part of the memory of that place. And the way she was telling about the world that was passed on to her by her enslaved grandmothers and grandfathers. So she was a person that could build her life, her family, on the appraisal of the traditions and the oral traditions and the memories and the celebrations of a memory that is being raised. And the title of this entry is Josefa Pereira Lau. And a sentence she was to say, and she liked to say, is, I am Black and Indian descendant, because she was she wanted to highlight this memory that was being erased. The city where she lived was built on the beginning of the second decade of the 18th century with the transference of the enslaved Black people and other settlers that were, arriving there in that part of the city. but there was already a settlement of indigenous people already there, and they lived all together, the Portuguese, the indigenous population, the black community, but this indigenous memory was erased. So Dona Josefa was always looking forward to reinforcing this memory, and she was always saying, I am black, I descend from black and indigenous. So now, to go over time, I'm gonna just ask you to please read this entry with other information that you have available on the internet. Last year, a museum, Afro-Amazonian Museum, was created, paying tribute to Dona Josefa, and that gave the name to the museum. So that's it. Thank you. I just wanted to highlight an element that you are going to find in all the stories today. The crossing, the intertwining of the words of Black women that are militant, that are activists in each field, as deliverer, as worker, or whatever we do in our lives. Black women are seen as natural. This thing of caring, of collective caring. So when we talk about activism, we are talking about politics, public policies, and we're talking about empowerment. We're talking about all the forms of transferring knowledge that women do, Black women do, through writing, through oral traditions, to telling stories. So all the stories you're going to hear today, you're going to find similar elements among them. And this is not a coincidence. This is ancestral philosophy. And I would like to invite now Professor Sandra, who will talk about Jurema, right? I'm just going to add something. In our schedule, we have Sandra Mônica da Silva, and you don't have Mônica Francisco. Sandra did 2 entries, Jurema and Mônica's, but nobody should speak on Monica's behalf. She can do it. And that's why we invited her, even though she's not in your list. Our role here is not to give anyone's voice. I hate to say give voice to someone, because everyone has a voice, and we give them space to speak. We invite Monica to speak about Monica, and you see that other people who are entries, and they're going to talk about themselves here. Hello, good afternoon to all of you. Once more, I thank you for the opportunity you here listening to me, and to be part of this beautiful dictionary through Rosinalda, and Professor Thais. Guys, girls, Jurema Batista is in my history because of a context. The moment when I was writing my PhD thesis that is called Militant Activism of Women Living in Favelas in Rio de Janeiro. And I said before, even though I was a feminist, and I still didn't know back then the Black feminism, that white cloth of the feminism was wearing, let's say, that was not comfortable for me. And I worked for a long time with favelas, and I was seeing those women, and I was asking myself, who said that these women are not emancipated, that they're not feminists? So I decided to interview 10 women talking about her lives, and I came across Jurema. I know her personally because I was looking for a woman that I wanted a woman to interview that belonged to the politics, working with politics. And Jurema, the young girl I was looking for, and she was so busy, I couldn't interview her. So there was this gap. And while I was reading Lélia Gonzalez, I finished reading a text from Lélia Gonzalez, and I went to sleep. When I woke up, and I said to myself, Lélia, told to myself, whispered in my ears, interview Jurema. And this was extraordinary because Jurema talks about visibility, fight, struggle for visibility for Black feminism, especially in favelas and in Rio de Janeiro. So it's a girl that comes from a family that faces a lot of struggles in Minas Gerais. They arrive here in Rio and go to live in a favela in Darai, a place called Arrelia. They didn't have electric light. We didn't even know the quality of the water that arrived there. So it was a very hard and poor childhood. Unfortunately, her parents had this problem because they were addicted to alcohol. Her mother worked a lot. She worked in the houses of families, and she was afraid to leave the two daughters at home alone. Not to, she was afraid the daughters would be raped. So she tried to take the daughters to her workplace. And although she faced so many difficulties in the beginning of her life, she also talks about food that she liked, And she used to like to dance, to dance in carnival, to enjoy carnival. And when she started to go as a child to the houses where her mother worked, she started to realize that social inequality existed. Why in their houses she could find light, electric light, and water and food, and in her house she didn't have that. And she used to like to read a lot as a girl, and she was very active at school. And one thing that I realized, and I noticed from all women that I interviewed, they say that they came across racism at school, and they started to realize at younger age how life was. And this one in particular studied a lot and studied in post-graduation course. Says she witnessed so many heavy situations, such as murder, for instance. Jurema had 3 daughters and a lot of grandkids, and when she was 20 years old, she was this type of, do you remember that show on TV, Telecurso, for high school? And she was, that professor in the community and teacher in the community, working, helping everyone, And there was this person in the community that was, taking, materials for building houses to the top of the favela, and the policeman started, to beat this guy, and she intervened, and she was arrested. She was using a wig, and she thought that these things, did not exist, and she started to live this contradiction. And she started to see and to think that if that people did not organize themselves, the police would still go into the favela and perform a lot of atrocities. I'm still not sure, but Jurema Batista was one of the first president of Association of Residents in Favela in Rio. In terms of time, she becomes an activist, and one day she's in university, but she wasn't conscious about the Black issues. And at university, she listens to Lélia Gonzalez, and when Lélia speaks about Black women, and she was wearing a wig. And from that moment on, she never used a wig again. And Jurema, she about in her thesis and her undergraduate paper, she decided to talk about Helena of Troy. But then she changed her mind and she wrote about a black writer in Rio and what happened to her life. Together with other women such as Lélia Gonzalez, she became an activist anti-racism. She helps and starts the IPCM, the movement of the Black movement, the unified Black movement in Rio. She's the first Black woman in favela that goes abroad to represent Brazilian women in the third Congress of Black Latin women in Peru. And something very interesting happened. Maybe you know this story. During this Congress in Bertioga of the Latin American feminists, a bus left Rio full of women from favelas, activists, and Black women. They took our kids and food in the bus, and when they arrived there in São Paulo, they were not allowed to get in the Congress. And it was a fuss, a mess, And the women inside the bus, Jurema, you're going to go down and intervene. And Jurema went there and spoke in the middle of those women and said, the price we paid for the fee for this Congress is the amount that you pay monthly for our services in your houses. So, those women making such a mess in that bus. And from that moment on, they do not stay there. They go back. And this was told by Jurema. And while they were traveling from São Paulo to Rio, they started to sing inside the bus. They shared their food. They went to the beach with their kids. They were, celebrating. And when they arrived in Rio, they started the favela Black women in a center called Semufi. They started to create this political articulation, and together with Lélia Gonçalves, they create Nzinga. And in the 90s, she became three times consular, acting in favor of human rights, and by coordinating this commission, she was the head of all the movement against the Candelaria slaughter, and she was fighting for the boys that disappeared in Acari. She was in the World Conference of Black women or against racism and xenophobia. She focused on the effort for human rights, and especially for Black people, the rights of the women domestic workers. She was one of the first Black women to be granted the Nobel Prize, and she also belonged to Umbanda.
And there was a moment in which Jurema is converted to the Protestant Church. And this moment was very important for her because she was coming from the Black movement that had more influence from the African religion. And once she said, I had a disease, and I was cured at that moment of this disease. So it was in the church that I was cured. So I'm going to conclude. She was also a state representative, and she was a person that has still, she's around 65 years old. In 2007, she became the president of the Children and Adolescent Foundation, and she coordinates a program of missing children. And I conclude saying that the girl from above the hill is going to become a giant. Under a hill, the first Islam of Rio de Janeiro that receives electrical light from the struggle of women, Jurema Batista and her community. Thank you very much.
Eu quero passar a palavra imediatamente.
I like to pass the floor immediately to the person, property of the entry, Mônica Francisco, because we are anxious to know what are her impressions about this dictionary of Black women. If Sandra was gentle enough with her, now we are going to discover this. Good evening, good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to thank everyone here for being in this panel, because I'd like to listen to Sandra talking about me also. I think that's it. We don't need anyone to talk for us, but I think it's so beautiful, because I was so moved to listen to her talking about Jurema Batista. At the end of 2023, I learned a lot during 3 hours of interview that I witnessed. And let's hope until the end of this month we are going to launch these interviews. And one of these interviews is with Jurema. Jurema is a gigantic figure. Who is Mônica Francisco? I assume this identity, Mônica Francisco, which is the cognomen, the surname of struggle. Mônica Santos is the Mônica of the lack of water, lack of light, lack of electricity, of not understanding what the teacher said to her, that her friend, a child of a diplomat living in a very noble area in Tijuca, of the middle class, white, on the city in Rio de Janeiro. And the director of the school would say to Mônica Santos, that heard many times, Mônica Santos, when they used to call her, they would say, only this? Mônica Santos? Yes, Mônica Santos, that didn't know her biological mother, that wasn't raised by her father, but she was raised by her grandmother. So where my colleague would access, I wouldn't put even my finger. That's what I heard in the school. It's at school that we discover racism, and I didn't understand why this phrase was always present. Why this sentence was always a memory. This sentence was part of the structural racism process that we have always faced. In a slum where we didn't have electricity, where I learned to carry water in a small can of oil. Who remembers the small can of oil? Was my first can that I carried, the small ones. I learned very early age that we needed to struggle. We were there in the Maracanã River, swimming with the fishes, bathing, and seeing also the babies aborted, the fetus aborted by women. was curious to know why women would go to that angle to abort their children, their babies. And then we found aborted fetus of those women with so many children that they couldn't raise another one. My mother, with her recurrent pain, my mother was worked washing clothes, and she would hear a lot of offenses. What was the nickname? The daughter of the washing woman. So when I was a teenager, I understood that this is what my mother did to support us. And I was raised listening to my mother saying the need of studying and the need of working. Working was a mark of dignity. So I started working when I was 14 years old. I used to study during the evenings. I started working in a factory in Tijuca, in a textile factory. In a legal way, I have all my registries. So I conclude my studies already pregnant of my second child, because the domestic work and also my work, great part of my life was aligning domestic work, the activism. I didn't understand exactly what was the activism. I just understood that I couldn't be a person that took care only of my house and my life. So in 1988, half of the Borel slum just slided after the landslidings in the summer of 1988. Rio de Janeiro became a devastated field, a lot of families destroyed. At that time, many slums suffered with the rains, with the heavy rains. So I saw myself as some part of the collective, and I understood that I couldn't live only my life. So these stories are entangled. We understand that only our lives are not enough, that our ancestral gift is to contribute for the collective. And it's not something that is outside from what we are as personas, as subjects of our lives and the lives of others. We look to the neighbor, even if we don't talk to her, you take care of her children because you understand it's also your responsibility. And it's in this place that I'm going to discover the story of my slum, my community, a book called Struggles of Borel Slum. It's in this place that I have my children. I raise my first child, 17 years old, my second child. And it's in this place that I finish my studies. It's in this place that I build an organization of women thinking about generating work and income, thinking about the work of women in the society, women from the slums, their contribution for our society. We're going to organize the first association of women of Borel slum and also Indiana and other slums. We are going to organize the network of Borel's institutions to face the military occupation of the UPPs in 2010. We're going to discuss deeply the occupation of the city, and together with other leadership, building the movement. Islam is also city. Everybody talks about this now. And it was born in a conference with many leaderships in the slums. I don't like to use the term leaderships. I like to use references. So Monica Santos, were there, organizing and thinking slums memory from the Maré Museum, the Museum of the Maré community that was being inaugurated in 2000 to think the memory of struggle and the memory of the slums. From this place, It was born the resistance from the Borel's tragedy in 2008. And then we have Manuel Congo and Chiquinha Gonzaga and their ideas of occupation, and we help creating other associations. We help associating the mothers and women's struggles. The reference was the struggle of the Acari's mother that we help organizing based on the PRONACE, National Program of Security and Citizenship of the Cândido Mendes University, the Organization of Women, and we help creating the network of movements and institutions against the violence, which is largely known as the Network of Mothers Against Violence. We are crossing many actions and foundations. We founded the Forum of Public and Urban Reform, all the process of commercialization against the displacements, and we are going to organize against the police violence and also the death of the Black youngsters in Rio de Janeiro. Going into the university in 2008, and I graduated in social science. I'm a part of the JPER group against racism in Brazil and United States, connected to the National Secretariat of Racial Equality. I'm going to compose and be part of a lot of movements, and I build actions connected to Islam's memories. I'm going to work in all the projects of urbanization of the city of Rio de Janeiro since the Islam neighborhood, Favela Bairro, passing through water to everyone and PAC favelas. I get to the institutional politics, composing Marielle Franco's mandate, and from her figure, we see the possibility of occupying the political space. And I'm elected state representative in 2018. And among women, I'm elected the one that produced more. And in Brazil in 2022, I was the representative that most produced legislation for the population LGBTQE+, being a Protestant. I am a progressive, anti-fundamentalist, organized in the Labour Party, and continue with this struggle, Afrodiasporic struggle. It's international, this struggle, and we are the real revolution. There will not be possibility to Brazil and the world with the advance of the extreme right without having Black women and their talent to organize politically an ancestral and innate possibility and potential of organizing from the territories, from their territories. There will be no possibility of change for the human society without having Black, Afro-Indigenous, and Indigenous being in the center of the political formulations and of the organization of the civil society and its territories. I think this is Mônica Francisco, Mônica Santos, mother of Diego Francisco, almost doctor in urban sociology, and mother of Milena, a student of law. My son is a journalist, marketing director of a great company. He was raised in the Borel Hill, student of a public school. My daughter also student of a public school. All of them coming from this territory of public school, territory of slums. My son that used to hide in himself inside the closet of the rich ones It's there right now in the resistance of the youngsters. This is Mônica Francisco.
So many emotions. Do you realize that all of this is not in the dictionary, that it was a privilege for you to have her here telling the whole story? Because, of course, in the dictionary, you have a limit of words. And the idea is for you to get curious and dive into it. I forgot to say, to call the attention to something important. I have some issues with the Portuguese Brazilian language because I do not identify myself with it. And I'm finishing my second PhD in order to keep using the Quilombo language. I speak Quilombese, I live its philosophy, and I study to legitimate my possibility of doing it. So, of course, I'm going to make some jokes. I'm this naturally. Some people here know me. I talk to myself. I debate with myself because there are a lot of people living inside of me, and I have to give attention to all of them. So let's move on to the next one. A little bit of emotion now again with Valdenice José Raimundo, who will talk about Maria do Rosário Cláudio. I'm very moved and emotional and happy. I think that our journey is not really easy, but talk about our achievements makes us move on, keep going on. And I'm very happy to be here and share this moment with all of you. I bring a little bit of the history, a little bit because you gotta read the dictionary to have the rest, of Maria do Rosário Cláudio, and I called it as an Afro-Catholic and Malumba in the fight for against oppressions. And what moved and motivated me to write about her is the sense of collectiveness in her daily practice. When we arrive to the university with our PhD and we feel alone, we look for our colleagues and they're not there. And I'm talking about Black and men and women. And I found Irmã Rosário, Sister Rosario. That was the person who helped me to understand that that space was also mine and that I could be a professor, that I could share the knowledge that I have accumulated so far. Another motivation was to notice her care with women, Black and Indigenous women that were there in the university, always attentive, identifying where we were, if we were in need of something, food, hugs. She was able to see it, see through, and offer these things for us. And that motivated me to write about her. And the text was written with her, together, methodologically speaking. I would write and send it to her, and she would give her feedback. And it was, written by all of us both. And the great challenge was to, synthesize, summarize her life. She had 73 years old at the time I interviewed her. She's living, she's alive. And how can you transform this 73 years in an entry for a dictionary? And it was interesting because although we were living together, there were parts of our life that were unknown, and it was strengthening to, get to know those details. So I listed 4 issues for this moment, and I also made a joke that they were an imperative to boost your curiosity and your desire to get to know more about Sister Rosario. So the first thing was the family relationship. She is daughter of João Cláudio Maria Vitalina. They were 12 siblings, 7 women and 5 men. They were working with the land, agriculture, but they were not planning for themselves. They were planting sugarcane for a great farmer in that region, a big farmer. And one thing that she always highlighted is that what could sustain them was faith. Faith would keep them strong, all the family. And something else, another thing was the parties, the celebrations. Although life was struggling, although it was hard, they had, forró, they had celebration moments. And she has in her memory one person called Sinhá Anunciada. She was a walker that was, walking around telling stories. She didn't have a fixed house, a fixed place to stay. She was always hanging around. And when she was 20 years old when the abolition arrived to Brazil and was declared. And all children and adults were always very attentive to her stories. And the relationship with the territory. Sister Rosario was born in União dos Palmares in the state of Alagoas, close to the Palmares Quilombo. And she said that when she was a child, she loved to go up the hills and to actually go up the hill. And when she was finding several pieces of ceramic, utensils that were there, and the people there used to say that these tools belonged to the black slaves that ran away, that escaped. So it was a very hard childhood, and it created in her the desire of changing her journey. And through her aunt, she had access to a religious community, Sagrado Coração de Jesus, Jesus Sacred Heart, in the northeast of Brazil. And regarding the relationship with her community, she was very close to the religious communities in the base. And it also happened with me because I was also formed by these religious communities. And when we think about faith, not only we cannot disconnect it from ethic posture, ethic perspective. And Don Elder Camara, the bishop, welcomed her as in her first celebration, in the beginning of her religious path. And during the dictatorship, she was working in the Pernambuco, in Palmares, in the religious community there, and they were cultivating sugarcane. So it was not interesting to alphabetize the people there, but she was working in the sense alphabetizing them. And one day, a manager of this farm close to her and asked her, "You were creating a fuss?" And she said, "No, I'm just evangelizing." And I thought that was really remarkable because it creates another perspective for these people, for this situation, because she was alphabetizing people so that they could know about their own reality. And in her religious community, she stimulated women to study. So many of them went to technical courses, studied theology. She worked in the CNBB channel and arrived to the Pernambuco Catholic University, where I met her. She arrived in 1992 in this Catholic University in Pernambuco. She was a professor because she had a degree in theology from the perspective of the feminist theology. She studied in Brazil and abroad, and she started an activity that marked the women's life. She started to organize the Women's Week, encompassing all social movements, collectives, workers, aiming to, address women's struggle. And then some years after, the Catholic University started to give support this event, and we are until now organizing it with other themes, sexuality, for instance. And to close my speech, so I work with feminist theology, and I am very happy to come across Maricel because I study sciences of religion and study these perspectives. And I have to say that her perspective is well known by Ahua. Thank you. So I'd like to give the floor immediately to Luciano Oliveira Dias, the professor who is going to talk about Vladimina de Campos Neto. Good afternoon. So, feeling so emotional, authorized by Jose, so I'm going to talk a little bit about Laudelina de Campos Melo, but first I'd like to highlight two events from my personal life that are so important, and these two events are what made available this experience of life that connects me to Dona Laudelina, to the extent that I notice in this experience of life the constitution of a lineage that connects me to her. So I highlight once more that I'm very emotional and touched and moved to be here with you, with each of you, and particularly touched because I'm going to speak after Monica. To speak after you is an honor, but also a great responsibility. Thank you so much for being here with me. So let's go on to the events. The first one takes place here. I'm introducing myself to you. I'm Luciana. I'm Goiana. I was born in the city of Goiânia, daughter to Raimundo Preto, working with civil construction, and to Dona Fia Tatuia, a woman that have a short life, semi-illiterated, that could study a little bit, and even though she could study a little bit, she became at the end of her life a teacher. But this short life of my mother, Dona Fia, is strongly marked by the domestic work. She was born in the state of Goiás, a region called Carretão, went to Goiânia when she was a child in the 50s. And she didn't have her parents. She was living alone in her first childhood. She went to live in the streets, on the streets. When she found a family that adopts her so that she could work in the house, even though she was a child. And this domestic work that marks the life of my mother, and I want to understand where I come from, because that speaks a lot of the tie that I have to Dona Laudelina. I have a very large family, and my father was very poor and violent. So in my first childhood, I am thrown and condemned to develop the domestic work when I was a child. Moment when the instruments, the tools I was using to work were bigger than my own body. And this was, my father also told me to study, and he was actually saying that I needed to study at that time. So I was very good at what I was doing, and I was started to study, of course, and I became someone in life, as my father used to say. Now I teach at the Federal University of Goiás. I'm an anthropologist. I'm a social scientist in the undergraduate program. I became an anthropologist. I love anthropology. I'm one of the few Black anthropologists that studies race and patriarchy and race with violence, including in my own field. And this is me. I was challenged by Rose to write about Donna Laudelina, and I accepted it. So this is the first event. The second one, that already in university, I've been teaching for around 16 years. There was a moment that I had a lot of students to supervise, and the majority of them were Black girls. And I am proud to say that I created in that Federal University a post-graduation program, which is in interdisciplinary in human rights, that receives Black students, and all these students come to me as a coincidence to be supervised. And since I had a lot of students to supervise, I decided to supervise collectively. So let's, supervise all of you together. So I started to give these collective classes. And within these classes, I created a study group, Rosa Parks Collective, inspired by the story of Rosa Parks, a North American from Montgomery that in the 50s, in a very racist country, refuses to stand up in the bus to give her place to and inspired by her courage of that seamstress that after a tiring day does not stand up until the driver takes the bus to the police station, and she is arrested. And she affiliated herself to Martin Luther King and many others. And they started the main struggle, the main fight for the civil rights of the Black Americans, the African Americans. So she's known nowadays to be a promoter of peace and to promote the end of the racism and the racial segregation in the United States. So we have more than 100 students in the world in this program. It's a group of feminist students. It's a collective that is referred to this bus that it was occupied by Rosa Parks, and she stays in this program, and they only leave this program for when they have accomplished their objective. Many of them left Brazil. They went to study abroad. Some of them are working in North American universities after the PhD. And sometimes we go to the study groups and realize that we are only 10 studying. And I want to call the attention that we have one Rosa Parks here. Tonton belongs to the collective. And sometimes we gather together and we only have 10 girls studying. But it's because they are taking care of their lives, like Tonton that is here. Finishing her PhD, there you are in the world. So Collective Rosa Parks appears in this program, within the context of this program, post-graduation program, and some people coming from the law course also join us. Lizier is one of them, and she was a domestic worker. During the period, she was studying law in the Federal University, and Lizier came after me. She came looking for me to develop her PhD thesis about the laws regarding the domestic work, and she was motivated by her own place as domestic worker. And from that moment, I connect myself to her, and then it was like 6 years ago. We start to study the domestic work, and we start to get to know in a deeper way, in a responsible way, Laudelina Campos de Mello. These two events are important for you to inspire yourselves to read this entry, because in this entry we talk about Laudelina, the little girl that with 7 years old is a babysitter. She starts to work as a babysitter, and with 16 years old, she gets her first salary, work with salary, and she was born in Poços de Caldas in the state of Minas Gerais. And as many of us from my generation are condemned to the domestic work, and Laudemina starts to work as a babysitter. Then at 16 years old, she gets her first job with a salary, and then she starts to wake up
about activism, and she starts to understand the importance to act in a way that other domestic workers, the other ones, could not accept to be subjected to this kind of degradation that the domestic work submits women here. So she founds the first association of domestic workers in Brazil, in Santos. The first association at the time. Dona Laudelina creates the first domestic workers union. At the time of the Constitution of 88, with Dona Creuza from Bahia, with some others from Pernambuco, followed by the representative at the time, Benedita da Silva. She follows the creation of the Constitution, and she is one of the witnesses that goes towards the struggle for the rights of the domestic workers in Brazil. All these stories you're going to see in this entry. She died in 1991. She had 2 children. Her house was left for the domestic workers. It's where they have their union. So it's an inspiring woman. It's a woman that shows us, demonstrates, teaches us that we need to take care of a collective consciousness that is here among us, because this collective awareness can collaborate to form individual awareness. And together, individually and acting collectively, we can fight for the rights of women, of Black women. Dona Laudelina can be understood now as one of the main defenders of the rights of the domestic workers and also for human rights, because her agenda was very big. She created points of culture, and she used to teach groups of people, to teach them how to read and write and to impress on them citizenship in these destinations. And they are just destinations if they are free. Any choice is authentic only if freedom is the basis of it. It's impossible to make a choice in environments of oppression and in environments of condemnation. And Black women in Brazil, maybe less, because we have figures as Dona Laudelina, women still in Brazil still have their choices guided by environments that incentivates a lack of freedom of choice. So I invite you to read about Dona Laudelina. Thank you very much.
A Luciana me proporcionou déjà vu.
Luciana has made me have a déjà vu. I'm going to introduce myself because now I'm going to just introduce one of my women for which I wrote the entries in this dictionary. And I'm going to introduce two entries because they are very important for me. Eugênia dos Santos, founder of the Babia Fojá. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about Dona Maria José. My story is connected to Dona Maria José in many moments, but historically speaking, in 2007, they organized an Afro meeting in the Cidade do Goiás. And in one of these encounters, the government brought a terno de congata, which is a festivity. Up to that moment, my relationship with these festivities was a kind of distant. I was an only mother. I have there my baby who is filming. Now he's 30 years old. But it was only me and her. So we were watching this Afro meeting, and I really got impressed with the congada, and I started dancing. So when I was taking my PhD, I'm an archaeologist also. When I moved to Goiânia to have my master's degree, I researched some historical sites, and I followed Professor Manuel, my co-professor that guided me. So going back to Goiânia, I started to follow this manifestation of the congada. And the congada started, this movement was started with some workers that moved to Goiás, to Goiânia. So the majority of the black population is in the western part of the city. So what's my relationship with Dona Maria? In my first PhD, my thesis that I defended in 2007, and my research was culture and symbolism, and I work with memory in the congada, based on the memory of João Vaz, the founder, during the 70s, this congada house. So it's the oldest congada house in Goiânia. So researching about the memory of the founder, I found Dona Maria José, that it was his sister. So when I was studying her life, through her daughter, Virginia Alves, that occupied her place in the rituals, and of course performed all the functions that the mother used to perform. So Dona Maria José Alves was from Minas Gerais. I say from Minas Gerais, but she was born in the border of Minas Gerais and Goiânia. So sometimes people introduce her coming from Minas. Her family was devoted to the Holy Mother of Rosário. All of them had a Maria as a name or a Rosário as a name. And also, I met one of these members of her family that also was named Rosário. So when I researched and talked with the men of the Congada, they would refer only the memory of Mr. Casimiro. When I talked to the women that were the priestess and the queens, they would say that Dona Maria José was the founder. So I wanted to understand why there was this division. And I started really falling in love with her because her daughter became like a sister to me. And because, for example, Dona Maria José had anemia and she died during the pandemics, and she was born during the 30s in Catalão. She was born as a bandeirinha, that is a group of girls who are responsible to carry the flag of the Holy Mother of Rosary, Mary of Rosary. And in Goiás, we still have Saint Benedict and our Holy Mother of Rosário in Irinópolis, in Goiás. So we have the Saint Iphigenie, Mary of Rosary, and Saint Benedict. And Mary, Dona Maria José, she was not only a member of the Congada, she was very devoted, but she was always very political. She was a poet. She had a very unhappy marriage with a very violent husband. She left her. And in this period, she writes poetry, talking about how much she suffered racism because she was a sole mother, divorced. And where my story meets Dona Maria José was exactly in this point. I come from a Quilombo. I'm the first of 7 children. I come from a domestic family. My mother was a cook. So my first domestic work, I was 7 years old and I was a babysitter. And I was as a domestic worker in the big houses in Goiás. So I was pregnant of my child when I was 17 years old. My marriage lasted 4 years, and he exchanged me for an older one. And I stayed with my 4-year-old daughter, and I suffered all kinds of prejudice because I had to go back to the domestic work. So, for example, there was a woman that thought that her husband was in love with me just because was talking to me. So Dona Maria José also reports this. She had a diary. So I felt like I were the younger sister of Dona Maria José, even if I was initiated in the saint. I became a priestess. And I was accepted in such a beautiful way because of Dona Maria José. And in my doctorate thesis, I had all the brios of the community, all the levels of the community present there. And it was so beautiful to see when my thesis was questioned by an anthropologist that I have kept the identity of speech of my brios, and he was insisting that I had to put an observation saying that this was not the correct way of speaking. I rejected, I refused, and I told him that there is something called identity of speech. And above all, a black Quilombola woman, my grandmother was there watching me. And to accept what he was saying was to say that me and my grandmother didn't exist. So to summarize, because I'm not going to, of course, to talk about everything,
Summarizing, it's talking about Maria José, it's talking about myself. Even though I'm not a Cangadeira, I'm from Umbanda. She was Cangadeira and from Umbanda. She incorporated a Preta Velha. She would bless you and do the garrafadas. She was one of the founders of Afro Pastoral, Afro religious community, Catholic religious community. She was one of the founders of the first group of black women in Goiás, the Malungas. Soninha is there, and she's live proof of this. She was invited to speak in environments she would never imagine she could be. And she was invited to work as a health agent. But she was not only a health agent, she worked with basic political education, working on violence against violence. She used her story to arrive to other women. You know, she had a listening lab in order to advise and help these women. And through her articulation, and because she was very Catholic, she achieved the construction of a church. We have 8 congadas in Guyana, and the only one who has their own headquarters is hers. It was donated to Maria José. Divina, her daughter, told me this. It's the only congada with a headquarters because of the work she did, because she created the health religious Catholic community, the Afro-Catholic community. So she was a pioneer in all those senses. And by hearing other congadeiras talking about her, moved me so much. But there is something, a last fact. One of the congadeiras was a biracial woman, Veridiana. She died. Veridiana was a biracial woman. She was religious Catholic. She was a cooker, and she suffered a lot of prejudice because she was walking around with black people and people from Macumba and Umbanda, and people would say, "You don't need to walk with these people. You are white. If you define yourself as white, you can find another job." And she was very sad with people because she said she was not white, and she wasn't white. And she went to Maria José. Maria José said, "The what's the color of your blood?" Red. So you have the right of choosing the skin color you want. If someone asks you about your color, you reply, "What's the color of your blood?" It's the same as mine. And she cried so much, and from that moment on, she never felt diminished when people was, pointing out and talking about her skin color, saying that she could not be in the church and etc. because of her color. And she exposed the story of many of us, domestic workers, and it made me think that we did not advance in this sense. At least in my state, girls are there in the Quilombos, and they study. I belong to Agualimpa Quilombo in the middle of the Cerrado, the savannah, and they get these girls saying to the mothers that they are taking them to study, and in reality they are going to work to be domestic workers. They don't study, they don't have anything, and they suffer violence. And I had this aunt, this relative, and she started as a domestic worker with 7-year-old, and her boss, the house, the owner of the house, called us to try to get her from her house because she was becoming crazy. But she was not becoming crazy; she was suffering violence, and we had to take her to the hospital. And this Brazil also belongs to us. We have to acknowledge that black women, women from the outskirts, and our the best we can do is always to be insurgent, you know? So I invite you to learn about Maria José's history, about Laudelina, about Sister, about the other entries here, and Sandra, because these are amazing women and within your reach. You're not gonna be able to give new meanings to our history in Brazil if you don't listen to her, to listen to them too. That's all I wanted to say. I'd like to propose one thing, to dismantle this panel and invite the other five. And in the end, if you have questions, raise your hands. And at least 3 questions, all right? I'd like to invite now Lúcia Regina Brito Pereira, Sônia Cleide Ferreira da Silva, Vânia Maria da Silva Soares, and Gabriele Costa. And also Maria das Dores Rosário Almeida. The best one are the last ones. The royalty is the last one. And since I invited royalty member was the last one, let's start with her. Good afternoon. Good afternoon to all of you. I'd like to thank so much, Rosie, for all this dream. Because you have a dream, and this dream spread throughout the country. And I think it's remarkable, I come from Amapá. I'm from Macapá. And the person I wrote about is called Maria Cristina do Rosário Almeida Mendes, because from her husband, but my sister is Almeida. And why have I chosen her? Not only me, I wrote together with another professor. Why? Us, as Black women in the Amazon, the Black population in the Amazon is invisible. And this invisibility of this Black woman is one point. Another thing is when the Black woman arrives to a role in politics, you are also an invisible woman from the perspective of the Amazon community. I don't know if you ever heard or if you know about Cristina Almeida. This is a name that she uses in politics. Cristina, I am the 5th daughter. She's my 7th sister. We're daughter to Heloísa de Almeida and Lorenzo Tavares Almeida. My mother comes from a place called Vila do Carmo do Maquaquari. And many of the stories that we heard have to do with my mother's story. She's from the countryside, in a Black territory, does not have the right to land. And she goes to the capital. At that time, we didn't use this word capital. Macapá, and there she starts to work as a babysitter and meets my father, Lourenço Tavares de Almeida. And my mother didn't go to school, so my father, he studied a little bit more, and in that context he could have access to the public service. And a black family that has access to the public service at that moment gives you a differential, an upgrade respect to the other ones, because you were considered middle class, if you work in the public service. So Christina studied in a public school. We had a sister, an older one, Maria Luisa. She was one of the founders of the Union of Black People in Amapá, the first black movement in Macapá, and all of us embraced her cause. And we started to be activists, and she is an activist since 12 years old in the black movement. And we had in the state of Amapá, until the 80s, if you wanted to study, you had to go out, you had to leave. So I came to Rio, and I studied in the Rural Federal University, and she studied in Belém, Cristina. She graduated in management using the FIES, the financial, the federal funding, and she gets her degree. But before that passes. So we had to go back to Macapá. And when she returns, she goes to work in the military police. And she integrates the first group of women. She is the police officer number 2, and she passes in second place in this public examination for the military police. And she goes to work in the streets because for her it was not considered to work in the management part. So she goes to work in the traffic, and that bothered her. And she opens the first public examination for the assembly, for the legislative assembly in the state. And she becomes part of this assembly. Many things change in the state. And when she was in the university, she was also engaged in the movement, the Black movement, and the Socialist Party, the PSP, and she was invited to be a state secretary. But what changed? When did her life actually change? She is invited to be a superintendent at INCRA, and when she started as a superintendent, she started to work for the regularization of Quilombo territories. And when she left, before she left, she regularized 2 territories, Conceição do Macoaquari and Mel da Pedreira. But also as an activist, she started to denounce, and one of them was denounced for illegally possession of the land and was the president of the Legislative Assembly. So she had to go back to her work, and when she returned to her work, she was placed in the kitchen. In the kitchen of the assembly. She didn't go to the administrative work. And from that perspective, she gains visibility, and she goes to she enters politics and tries to, and she runs in the presidency together with Sarney. And she's the black woman candidate that gets Sarney to work on public policies for Macapá. I gave you this brief introduction because the entry is very small, and you're gonna we're going to read about this political side of Cristina, because up until that moment, Sarney was not doing politics in Amapá. So he sits down with the Black movement. He goes to the villa, to the municipality where I come from, where we come from, to understand who's Cristina. So everybody wants to know who was that woman. She was rainha de bateria for carnival. She would go to the stage dancing a marabás. She adopted as dressing the turban. And that's what we bring in her entry, this strong element of dressing. And she dances marabás, and she defies one of the biggest coronels in Brazil to step into her territory, and she starts to be known. We did not win the election, but what does she say? She said that she won the election. She was victorious. And how can people participate there without resources? All people were dressing with turbans to say that they were there giving support to Cristina. So the turban was the element of resistance. She gets elected in 2006 as a councillor for the municipality of Amapá. She deals with LGBTQ issues, traditional celebrations, Quilombos, women, and she suffers a lot because of that, especially because of the LGBTQ cause. She's the author of the first laws that was LGBTQ in the municipality of Macapá. She does not conclude her mandate. She gets elected 3 years in a row as a deputy, as a state deputy, facing a lot of structural racism. And she achieves and is very successful in many fields. But to conclude, I want to say that Cristina is the biggest representation, Black representation in politics in the Amazon region. Thank you, Dorica. Dorica is only for the friends, close friends. She's Maria das Dores. I call now Lúcia Regina Brito Pereira to talk about Teresa Franco. Good afternoon, all of you. It's an immense pleasure to be here in such a beautiful event. Thank you, Rosanalda. Thank you, Thais. I don't see you here. For the invitation and for being able to, share with you, see some familiar faces. These gatherings are good because we can meet and we share, each of us from our places, our amazing stories of amazing women. I come from the South, Rio Grande do Sul. We have Black people there too. My companions, my friends, and we have an activism, a very strong activism that contributes to numerous policies that we have in Brazil. And just, to give you some reference, November 20th, this idea was born in Grupo Palmares in Rio Grande do Sul in the south. And now we have our Conceição, who participated at the Grupo Palmares. And that is one of my Marias of my life. I have my grandmother, Honorina, who was not a Maria, but all her daughters, Sueli Maria, Doraci Maria, and Noraci Maria, my mother. So on their behalf, I ask you permission to tell the story of Teresa Franco, a woman that is crossed by all these issues that you spoke about here. Who was Teresa Franco? a woman that was born in the countryside of Rio Grande do Sul, that was given by her family at the age of 5 years old to another family to be cared of. In this family, she faced a lot of abuses at that time. The court came to know and removed Teresa Franco from that family. What happened next? She was taken to her family, but she does not go to her family. She stays on the streets and try to find, her place in parties, celebrations, samba, with a very diversified public. And she was fighting for her survival. She was a reference where she lived when she was an adult already in Vila Cruzeiro do Sul. At that time, it was the biggest village in Porto Alegre city with a significant black community. Well, she was becoming, a person, a leadership in the community when she had some the police, situations, the police, breaking into people's houses. Teresa Franco was defending those people that were being, beaten, that were being abused, because she was facing the police. Well, during her life, as her life evolved, she received a nickname, the Black Devil. By the nickname, we can understand how powerful she was. We have a lot of different versions regarding this nickname. Teresa Franco then starts to live her life. And in the meanwhile, in the 60s, no, in the 90s, there is this radio show in a traditional radio in Porto Alegre. I forgot the name of the show. And was a show related to the people denouncing and support to people, to the community. And the community, some people started to denounce her because she was throwing parties, And in this famous show, the speaker was Sergio, a guy that ran for the Senate and became 3 times deputy. And since it was a really sensationalist program, show, he was like saying a lot of bad words to her and about her. And she decided to go there to face him and talk to him. And she went to the radio, and they did not end up fighting. They ended up building a relationship. Teresa said that Sergio Jambiase was the means through which she became free. That by meeting him, she was liberated, and she ended up working with him, with this speaker, Sergio Jambiase. And she was some sort of public relations there. Receptionist, she would receive people. She would have to give numbers for people who wait in line to be to talk to the speaker. And she was very potent. She was black, fat, extremely nice, with a beautiful smile, extremely sympathetic. And people who talk about her always talk about how nice she was. And she stayed in this show for a long time. And when this speaker goes to the public, to the political life, he invites Teresa Franco to be a counselor. And what's the thing about her? She's the first black counselor in Porto Alegre. She is elected in 1997. It's really recent, right? From 1997 to 2000, year 2000, she works there. She even, fainted when she had to take office. And she said that she didn't believe she was the one chosen to be there, the most voted one. And she wanted to work for the women, for the informal sellers, street sellers. We call them camelô. They stay in the same place in the street selling their things, their products. And she was vice president of the Commission for Human Rights. So Teresa Franco, after she concludes her mandate, it's important to highlight that we will only have an elected consular, directly elected, 23 years after. So during this period of time, after Teresa took office, we will have councillors that, are replacing someone, they are taking office because someone left, and so on and so forth. But directly elected only in 2020, Karen Santos, who was the most voted for this democratic process. So Teresa Franco, a black woman who was arrested, who was a prostitute, she arrived to this place and has a life marked by all the problems that we have experienced in our lives, black women. In that, what motivated me to write about her, because it's an important part of the city of Porto Alegre. She wasn't a woman in movement. She was always moving on, and she maybe didn't even realize how big and how important she was. And unfortunately, 1 year after she concluded her mandate, at the age of 66 years old, she dies due to some health issues, high blood pressure and some other things that we all have. And Teresa, she's a reference to me. She's a reference for us, black women in Rio Grande do Sul, that marked in the city of Porto Alegre. She was really present and left her legacy, her ideas, and she used to say, I won't stop here. But unfortunately, we have, situations in life that we are not responsible for and that we cannot change. So this was what I had to say. And Teresa Santos, the devil woman, the black devil. Just for us to move on, the two women that will speak now, Sônia Cleide and Vânia Maria da Silva, they are the writers and the ones that they are written about. I want to invite Silvia Cleide to speak about. They are both the writers and the entries themselves. So first of all, I would like to ask permission to the younger and the older. Ask permission to all my ancestors, to my mother, Erundina Ferreira da Silva, my father, Teodorido Ferreira da Silva, Dona Maria José. I have to ask her for permission to Divina, and also ask permission in this moment to my best friend, this great friend, Eudesia, who's from Rio and who taught me so much and passed now. As you have all heard, Jose, I was so emotional. It's so hard to speak now for me because when you speak about Dona Maria José, Dona Maria José, together with my father, they founded the Catholic communities, the Black Catholic communities in Goiás, discussing about prejudice inside the Catholic Church. They faced the priests and started to perform Afro masses in the church. And we would take all the elements of Umbanda to the masses, but we wouldn't say that it was Umbanda. And with her, together with my mother, in Jardim América, we had a small room where my mother would do garrafada, do blessings. Dona Maria José would go there too. People started to say that they were two sorcerers. So when you bring Maria José to me, you bring the elders that I grew up with and learned from. So I came from a city called Jataí. I was born in Jataí, in the countryside of Guyana. I went to Guyana with my father, and since my father always understood himself as black, and also my mother, and I always knew that I was a daughter to black people, and my father was working at Consórcio Rodoviária. They were building roads, so my father would be months traveling, but every time he arrived, he was listening to the radio to know about politics, and he was very wise, and my mother was even wiser because my mother had all the powers of creating medicines and praying, and women that were getting pregnant, my mother would do garrafadas, and she was there inside the Catholic Church, working in the Catholic Church. I was baptized and received many other participated at many other situations and celebrations. My grandmother taught me to pray in many ways, and she taught me to deliver kids. So I learned too, about delivery of children with my grandmother. And inside of these Catholic communities, I worked with my father. My father didn't know how to read. He could barely sign his name. So I traveled a lot with him. Many people believed I was working in this pastoral Catholic community. I was just helping my father by reading for him and writing for him. But all these elements of my journey. And when I met some groups, it was the first gathering of black women in Belo Horizonte. So I learned there were, groups of black women, and I went back to Guyana, amazed. It was, I had to stop working with my father because he was chauvinist. He was the only one who knew. He was the one who had, who knew things, and not me, not women. But he was the man. He was the man providing for everyone. He was the one giving speeches. So I had to stop working with him. And my mother and Maria José were pivotal for me. This was in 1983, and they supported us for the black group, for the black women, the group of black women, the feminist black women. And I said to Maria José, I can give you support, I can help you, but I cannot, exit the church. So many people I knew, many women I knew, they were, nuns, and they stopped being nuns and became lesbians. And at the time, there were many lesbians, and everyone that was saying that this black community were a group of lesbians. And it was a huge fight, a huge struggle, because our first headquarters was in my backyard of my house in Barracão. We made a partnership with a group of white feminists that had a project articulating with Brazilian women, the first articulation that I joined, and there I learned what feminism was. I met so many people, Vilma, many feminists there. Vilma is here. She has his book, and I invite you all to read it. She's a professor. She's alive. She is going on. She goes on working and helping black women, because many black women nowadays, young ones, they don't know about the old ones that paved the way for them to, be and do what they do right now. So within this feminist journey that started with white feminism, I learned a lot with the white feminism. The white women taught me what feminism was. And they helped us creating our statute. We registered the Black Women Group in Goiás with the first registration of the first Black women group of the state of Goiás. And with this, we had a lot of, we stopped working with many people. Many women in the church stopped talking to us. At that time, it was complicated. Every time, everyone was saying that we were, and until now, we have Geralda, one of the founders, together with me. We are Catholics. And every time she speaks, she says, I am Catholic and I'm not lesbian. Because until now, she has to clarify and say it. Every time she has to say it. It was, signed in our history. There's another feminist, Black one from Goiás. I would like to greet her. She's not amongst us. She was more than a mother. Urani Esther. Urani Esther taught me what's the public health system. She took me to get to know all the policies regarding SUS, the public system. And since I was already, making teas for people, so let's go to the health department, the health field. She was a senatoress. She was a social assistant, and fighting against and fighting for feminism and against chauvinism. And in 1999, we attended this feminist Black women Congress. We had people from the Doha Congress there, and they were discussing many Black women together. At night, we're going to the swimming pool, to talk about the Congress, the conference. And I was the only one from Goiás together with Rurani, but you had Jurema Werneck, Lúcia Xavier, you had Sueli Carneiro, and we were there. We saying we need to have an articulation of Black women so that we can organize ourselves and stop asking help from the help of white women. And there we created this articulation and went to the to organize events and create movements, and I'm proud of this, to know that I was part of this process of a struggle, a fight. I went to Geneva, to Chile, and although we faced so many struggle, not that we wanted reparation, we wanted affirmative policies. And when I see so many professors, so many black PhDs, I'm very honored and happy to know. I forgot to say that Durica belongs to the articulation since the beginning. Our first school coordination was done by Mena, Malunga, Criolla, Guilherme. Am I forgetting someone? Only us. The first planning for the organization was made in Amapá. So it's important to say, because it's important for these black girls in university, they need to know about our story. They need to know how it worked, how it happened, how Monica and Rio fought for it and arrived and achieved. It's a whole process. We have our ancestrals, we have our older ones that are alive and are moving on for us to be here. We have Rosie with her spirituality, because she does not walk alone. Because today, together with Professor Thais and Professor Irene, that helped me with my entry. I have to say it. Irene was a dear friend of my father. And it's important to say, for me to arrive here. So I trust my Orisha, because my Orisha knows what he's doing. Because several times, me from Goiás, I was sitting down with Jose to drink a coffee, and I'd say, Jose, I've fought so much, but I feel like people treat me as an enemy and not as a partner, right? Because people start to see the other ones as enemies. But all these things that are happening here and in this panel, it shows something that my mother used to say, because my mother was the one, welcoming everyone in my house, everyone from the Black movement. Almost everyone has already been to my house, and they have stories to talk about my mother, the food she was offering. But she used to say, you have to go on to fight. She was not a person going to many places, but she would say, I'm going to take care of your son. Go, travel, learn. And Rosie, I'd like to end saying to you that I'm thankful because you are my sister. And I'm thankful because you are in my life. Me and my family, even if we're not together every day, but we are friends. And my time is over. Just one thing. Monica, I started in politics in 2020. I was a candidate as a consular. I became a substitute, and then I ran again this year, because my sister Divina died because she lacked public policies in health. And since the beginning in my life, we were talking about this health condition that victimated her. And I have this same condition that killed her, which is sickle cell disease, sickle cell anemia. And we lacked public policies in this sense for this particular sickness. And I don't want any other woman to die. We have to get together. We need more Monicas. We need women to black women to occupy spaces of power and to create our laws. Because if we do not occupy, we're gonna fall down. Because these white people, they say they are partners and they are not. And to end on Friday at 9 o'clock, we have a meeting at Casa de Luzia to talk about the Black Women's March in 2025. You are all invited. Thank you so much. So many kisses. I promise you I won't cry anymore, guys. We have maximum 15 minutes to finish because I've been already alerted 3 times. I'm so, happy to hear you that I forget time. I'm sorry. So I want to invite Gabriele because I want Vania to close, So first I invite Gabriele. We only have 5 minutes, 15 minutes to finish. Hello. How are you? Good afternoon. I asked permission to my ancestors, to the older and the younger, men and women. I am Gabriele Costa Pereira. I'm daughter to Maria Aparecida em Jesus Francisco. I'm come from the extreme south of Rio Grande do Sul, Rio Grande City. It's a pleasure to be here with you. It's a pleasure to introduce you to Zeli de Oliveira Barbosa, who's a writer from Porto Alegre. She talks about a very different Porto Alegre to us. And she said she's compared to Carolina Maria de Jesus. Zeli wrote only one book. She had 5 kids. She was a domestic worker. Her boss, a sociologist, gave her the opportunity, since she came to know that she was writing a diary at Ilhota. Ilhota is a neighborhood in Porto Alegre, and people were removed from there because it was in the city center of Porto Alegre, and it was created the Restinga neighborhood. So Zeli, and why have I chosen Zeli? My mother is a domestic worker. My mother came to the big city, let's say, with 12 years old, from the rural zone of Domingos Petrolini. And Zeli taught me many things. And she was saying, since she was raised by a white family, just as the girl said before, of this crossing of roads, this family raised Zeli, and they had a different perspective when looking to people from Ilhota. So she was talking about health issues, people suffering and dying of tuberculosis, which is something so actual, so current, about kids, about basic sanitation, floods that happened to us in May in Rio Grande do Sul. So Zeli is so current. She's so present. She's so actual. So I'd like to thank Jose and Thais for the opportunity of bringing her here to you. I wrote it with my professor, Amanda. Zeli, I studied her since 2011, and it's very important to bring her here. And I hope you read the entry, get to know our book, and since I have to do it fast to close, to conclude, I'd like to say that our dictionary is part of a collaboration of Nós Mulheres, us women of all the country, bringing the history that is not told by the Brazilians, usually, that you haven't heard of. And I was yesterday at the samba party saying that girls, let's celebrate because we are here, and it's something superb for us. Thank you so much. Now, after being, after the words, her words that gave us shivers, let's hear Vânia Soares talk about Vânia Soares herself. I want to start saying about how thankful I am to my ancestrality for being here for this magical moment, for these magical days. I have to thank everyone who indicated my name, and I'm talking about Professor Dr. Ronilda Yakemi from the São Paulo University. I have to thank Rosinalda and to thank Thais for her welcoming, her affection of, and how she welcomed our short story of life. And I have to say that I am here because I am a legacy of two wonderful black women, in which I was inspired. And I inspire myself every day, my mother and my grandmother. And before I start, I was already, I was the one damaged because I was the last one. And I don't have so much time. But I would like to say that today I heard everything that I think that all women, and not only women, but the black community needs to hear. Nobody has to speak on our behalf. We have our voices. We have to speak on our own behalf. We have to be in the center of the political debate. We have to occupy the parties, the administrative part of the parties, so that we can take our issues, our demands in all fields, public security, education, health. I really have to say these words. I'm short of time. I have to be brief. And I hope that, again, we will meet again and I'll be able to, have more time to give you more information. And be able, and I hope I'll be able to give you more details of things that we can say in a more constructive way. I am Vânia Soares. I am a pedagogue. I am a daughter to very powerful women from which I received my legacy, and I working in the public service at the state of São Paulo. I started as a professor, and I've been working there for 20 years at the military school, and I was the president of a Quilombo in the state of São Paulo, indicated by the government at that time. I was a coordinator of the black population, indigenous population of the state of São Paulo. I built and I contributed to the installation and the creation of many councils in the municipalities of São Paulo, Citizenship Council. And nowadays, I've been coordinating the Interreligious Forum of the state of São Paulo, Interreligious Forum for freedom of belief. This was the first forum created by law in Brazil. And as one of our advances, we have opened cells in municipalities, and we have achieved to have approved the law against religious prejudice. and we have legal devices to use against people who are commit the crime of religious intolerance. And I say religious intolerance because I'm talking about religious racism, as you say now, because there's you have to attribute penalties to racism. Racism is crime, you know. So we have to receive the denounces, process them, penalize those who commit this violent discrimination and against human rights. So freedom of religion, freedom of belief, it's so important to us. And African religions are the ones that suffer the most, and we need to find means, just as against racism means to denounce, you know, to be able to report, to expose the situations. And this should be a model to the state, to the whole state. And since I don't have so much time, you can go on, go on. You have some more minutes. So I can say that my journey starts in a public service, but it was a tool to the population. Not as a black woman that takes office, sits down, and only thinks about that particular seat and does not defend the cause that she believes in. And our cause needs people that are not afraid, they are brave, they are available to face. So what Monica says before, our deputy, I vibrated. I was thrilled. We need to be in spaces of power that will give us voice, spaces of power where, even if we have voices, we are not subjected to anyone or to any role that we might occupy, because our community needs people. I don't say leaders because I understand that we don't have a leader ahead. We have people in which we believe. We cheer and we hope that they're going to occupy the offices, and that sometimes they do not represent us when they arrive there, and they represent the cause when they arrive there. And I'm very happy. It's the first time I come to an event of black women, powerful in the academy, intellectuals, and we need to give visibility to this work, to these women. I don't want from this moment on in my state, I don't want to hear people say that who are the intellectual black people, as if we did not exist. I'm going to leave this event energized, happy, and I will speak to the world that I have been in Rio and that Thais, Floop, Rosinalda managed to put together a team of noble women. Us women, we have the privilege to change the world, to change this reality, and put the black person, the black man or woman, in the highest level. And maybe in next elections we will have higher representativeness in our parliaments, so that our causes will be dealt with by people who experience them, who experience racism, intolerance, people who suffer really in their lives, and that nobody else will speak on our behalf. Congratulations, intellectual women. Congratulations, black women in the academy. Congratulations to all women. Congratulations, Floopy. Thank you so much for welcoming here in Rio. Thank you so much for your existence. Thank you because you are well represented and you represent very well our Black community, not only in São Paulo, but this community in the world. I was last month in Chicago, in the United States. I received an award. And I was very proud of the Black people I saw there, with whom I was in that place. And you should know that it's the same emotion that I felt there, I'm feeling here. I'm Professor Vania that came from the countryside 47 years ago in the state of São Paulo. I came to São Paulo city to win, and I won. I arrived in Chicago, I arrived in Rio. I saw fantastic women, powerful women. I can only say thank you, universe. Thank you, creator. I arrived here. We arrived here. This is a 1 million team, only very expensive players. I'm so thrilled and happy that I went overtime, that I feel so, renewed. I won't apologize because I had to go to the bathroom. I couldn't wait. That's why I laughed. I feel so good. I want to thank you and say that unfortunately we don't have time for questions. But girls that are here in this panel will be around. If you have students, if you have any doubts, I authorize you to approach them and ask questions, right? Thank you. Thank you for all. And let's gather here in front for a picture, for a photograph. Thank you.
Então, gente, todas do time. Quem desceu e quem está aqui. Vamos tirar uma foto? Tem que ser embaixo, porque eu acho que em cima não cabe todo mundo.